Our next speaker, as I said, is Marsha Kelly, and she's going to be talking about what did I just say and getting our message right. Marsha is the president of MSK Ventures, Inc., a consulting firm that provides public relations, strategic communications, issue management, and business development counsel for numerous clients in the agricultural and pet industries, among others. Kelly worked in government and academia before establishing her own consulting firm in 1981. She is a member of the Public Relations Society of America and the Minnesota chapter of PRSA, and also one of our favorite speakers. We're glad that she's here with us again. Marsha Kelly.
Thank you, Patty. First of all, I want to tell Dr. Croney that I think that's one of the best presentations I've heard on managing the animal rights and animal welfare issues for people in animal enterprises. It's always been my belief, and I'm sure that if you guys have attended these conferences in the past when I've spoken, you remember me saying this. My first boss in the public relations business, I was right out of college, didn't know a thing about public relations. I was an English major. And he called me in and he said, look, this is not rocket science. Public relations is not hard. You do the right thing and then you tell people about it. And that did not immediately sink in on me. But as I have worked in public relations over the past 40 years, it's become clearer and clearer to me what a brilliant statement that was and how much it defines what the best public relations is all about. No amount of good public relations will ever compensate for bad animal care. And Dr. Croney is so right about that. If you do the right thing, the public relations takes care of itself. But you have to start from a position of doing the right thing. Of course, we all know that in the real world, while 95% of us might really break our backs to do the right thing every day, there always seem to be that 3 or 4 or 5% of us that don't get it, that don't play by the rules that we've all agreed to, that do things wrong, and that make everybody look bad. And so we wind up having to deal with these situations, even though our own personal commitment to doing the right thing has never wavered. So let's keep in mind, as we sit in this room and talk about public relations, that we know the best PR is doing the right thing. But it isn't always possible to convince everybody in our own industries that that's what has to be done. So here's what we're going to cover. Now, understand too, this is a very diverse group, and it's always a little hard to kind of find the right note in terms of how much or how little information to share, because some people have done a lot of public relations and outreach work in their various fields. Others have not done so much. You might have varying and diverse levels of experience and knowledge about this. So I'm kind of trying to hit a middle note here. So if this is too elementary, I'm going to apologize in advance. If it's too detailed, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm just kind of aiming at the middle and hoping that I hit somebody. So I hope you'll bear with me. We're going to talk about developing your messages. That was one of the things that Patty asked me to focus on. And it's particularly appropriate, I think, as a follow-on to what Dr. Croney had to say. Developing your messages, being an effective source of information about your industry, getting your message out both in traditional media and in online and social media, which is a new challenge for some of us. I can tell you that it's changed the nature of public relations from my perspective as a practitioner, the development and emergence of online and social media. It's a new challenge. Knowing your audience, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, developing your message. There's a lot of words out there, there's a lot of language out there, there's a lot of verbiage out there, and so when we focus on our messages, we have to be very clear about what it is we want to communicate. Messaging is everything. So when you think about developing your own key messages, think about these questions. What is the most important thing your audience should know about you? Now, Dr. Croney told us what the public wants to know. And essentially, she sort of summarized what I've always felt, not only instinctively, but as the result of research. There is 10% out there, or maybe 15% of the public that's sort of radical animal rights, vegan, vegetarian, you know, just, they're not reachable, okay? You're never going to convince them that what you do is okay. Don't worry about them. Don't try to convince them. They're not your target. Your audience is sort of that 80% of people in the middle that eat meat, drink milk, wear leather, go to the zoo, go to the circus, and maybe go fishing now and then. And all they want to know is that you are being humane and responsible in your treatment of animals. They don't want to feel a lot of guilt. Remember that guilt discussion? They don't want to feel a lot of guilt. They want to trust that you are doing the right thing. So what is the most important thing that that audience needs to know about you and the work that you do? What is the most important thing that audience should know about your critics? Now, not in every situation are you going to be responding to an HSUS or a PETA or a local animal rights group. Sometimes you're just trying to stimulate coverage of the good things that you're doing. But when you are challenged by an animal rights adversary, it's very, very important that you educate the public about what they should know about that group. People should know about HSUS, what HSUS really stands for, what their agenda is all about. The fact that this organization that purports to be about pets is really not a pet organization. They're not an animal shelter organization. They provide no direct services to animals. It's important for people to know that. It's important for people to know about PETA. When PETA is out there, you know, with celebrities taking off their clothes to protest against fur, it's important for people to know these are the same people that compare harvesting chickens or killing chickens for food to the Holocaust and talk about slavery in the same breath as they talk about animal agriculture. So it's important for people to know where these other groups are coming from, what their agenda is, and why they're not necessarily the most credible people to be talking about the issue. Then it's important to talk about why your audience should care about what you do. What's in it for them? What difference does it make to them whether you continue to do what you do? How do they benefit? And then there's a call to action. What do you want your audience to do? Do you want them to visit your website, visit your Facebook page, vote against an initiative, write a letter to a legislator, attend a meeting? What is it that you want them to do? And in almost every case, when you're dealing with the press particularly, you're going to want to use that opportunity to make a call for action so that you know whether or not people are listening to you, and you can, to some extent at least, generate support for your agenda and your goals. So those are the questions that you need to ask yourself as you begin your messaging. Your key message should position yourself. Here's who we are. It should reposition your opponents when you are dealing with an opponent. Here's who they are. Engage the audience. This is why this matters to you. And encourage action. Here's what you can do. So those are really the 4 functions that your key messages have to perform. Now, these are just examples. And everyone, I think, has to work to develop their own key messaging because you know what it is you want to communicate. So depending on whether you're in biomedical research, or you're in agriculture, or you're in pet breeding, or you're in the greyhound racing industry, which is one of the organizations that I work with, your basic message statement might be a little different. But these are the kinds of statements and the kinds of messages that you should be working with. Our work benefits both humans and animals. We provide high-quality humane care based on sound veterinary science. We have tough regulations to ensure proper animal care, and we enforce them. You might be interested to know that in the greyhound racing community, when they have an egregious case of bad animal care that results in serious harm to greyhounds, they are authorized under the bylaws of the National Greyhound Association to ban those individuals from the industry for life. And no one in greyhound racing who is currently licensed is allowed to do business with those people. It's a lifetime expulsion from the industry. Now that's enforcement. And I respect that. And even though it doesn't eliminate all of the bad players, I can tell you that it has cut down on the number of bad players. And the people who are in the industry today, for the most part, are doing a pretty darn good job of raising and caring for greyhounds. So it may be difficult to pass enforcement, internal enforcement with teeth, but it's not impossible. You can do it. So these are the kinds of key messages that you might adopt as your own. And as I said, it's all about what you think people need to know about you and what you do. Repositioning your opponents, again, when that's applicable, it's important. It's important for people to know that these groups are not about animal welfare, they're about ideology. It's important to know that groups like the HSUS don't provide direct services. They don't really deal with animals. How can they be considered as experts on animal care when they don't even provide animal care? It's a stretch. The animal rights agenda is too extreme for most Americans, and poll after poll has demonstrated that that's the case. Animal rights groups want to end American agriculture and the farm way of life. That's another example of the kind of messaging that you might be using. Now, I will tell you this. Without good research and good polling and good data, sometimes you're kind of shooting in the dark. And I'm a real believer in research and data. It's expensive to do that kind of research sometimes, and sometimes it's difficult if you're a small operator in a small industry to gather the resources to get the information that you need. But it's important for you to be able to know what messages resonate. Now, back a few years ago, people were really sort of committed to the idea, the ideal maybe, of preserving American farms, because living on a farm is a special way of life. It connects us to our past, it connects us to our traditions, it connects us to the land. People were committed to sort of seeing that preserved. It would be interesting to see whether that is still a value that Americans share. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. But in certain areas, certainly geographically, particularly areas where agriculture is a major force, it is, I think, a valid message and one that you could use, that people have a certain commitment to that way of life and you want to preserve it. As you try to engage your audience, you may look at key messages like this. If animal rights groups have their way, you won't be able to own a pet. You won't be able to eat hamburger or wear leather or have a glass of milk. If you enjoy visiting the zoo or taking your kids to the circus, this matters to you. This legislation could deny you the right to go fishing next summer with your family. Those are the kinds of messages that are very short, very concise, but they tell people what's at stake. And then encouraging action. Let people know what you want them to do, even if it's nothing more than visiting your website or visiting your Facebook page. Make sure that you don't waste the opportunity to get them to reach out if you can possibly motivate them to do so. Now let's talk a little bit about being an effective source of information, because as you are the person who's going to be doing the talking, you want to make sure that you do an effective job of delivering the messages that you've so carefully and competently defined. I like to advise people to think in terms of pyramids. In our normal conversation, we tend to not always answer questions directly. If I asked you, what's your opinion of Dr. Croni's message? You might say, well, she talked about this, and she talked about this, and she talked about that, and I really liked it. In media interviews, you have to kind of think the opposite way. You have to get the point out first. So if I said to you, what did you think about Dr. Croni's message? Your answer would be, I loved it. It was great. And here's why. Okay? So keep in mind that when you are in an interview situation, or really in any communication situation, because this, I think, is sort of a universal rule, get to the point first. It's particularly important, though, in a media situation, because whether it's a TV interview or whether it's a print interview, there is going to be a lot of editing done before your words finally get to the ultimate destination, the public. So the more you get that point out and the more you repeat that point clearly, concisely, and often, the more difficult it's going to be for any editor to edit around it. They just are going to keep running into it. If you keep saying it, they're going to keep running into it. So get your key message out first, repeat your key message, and then do all the supporting evidence, add examples, bring in your third-party verification, do all that beefing up that you need to do to lend support to that message. But get that message out there right away so there's no mistaking it. Before you ever even begin an interview, you've got homework. Check out the reporter's previous work, and that's very easy now. It didn't used to be so easy, but now with the internet, my gosh, you can Google a reporter and you can see everything that reporter has written for the last 5 years. You can learn all about their educational background. It's amazing. You can check out who they hang with on Facebook and LinkedIn. I mean, you could learn a lot. And that's good information because that's going to tell you whether the reporter has a particular perspective, whether they've written on this subject before, if they're knowledgeable or not. Good information. Find out what their news hook is, what the story angle is. Why are you doing a story about this right now? What triggered your interest in this issue? It's important to know that because that will tell you who else they're going to talk to, what issues they think they're going to cover, what you need to be prepared to discuss, and so on. Then you determine your messages, as we discussed. Then you figure out what is the medium, and who is the audience for that message. For example, if the newspaper is your regular daily local newspaper, you kind of know that's going to be generally read by members of the public, members of your community, across all different walks of life and businesses. If it's a business journal that's going to be interviewing you, you know that that's a business-oriented publication. They may have a slightly different interest. It might be you're getting interviewed for a legislative newsletter. In that case, the focus is going to be legislation. So think about what the medium is, where that interview is going to take place, and who's going to be watching or listening or reading. That's an important understanding. It's an important piece of the context as you prepare for your interview. Set the ground rules. I think we have a tendency to believe that the reporters are in charge. Not the case. You are in charge of your own destiny when it comes to interviewing. You can set the ground rules. So if an interviewer, a reporter says to you, I'd like to talk to you about this proposed piece of animal welfare legislation. You can say, well, I can certainly tell you what our position is on the legislation in terms of my organization, but if you want to talk about the veterinary principles or the veterinary science that's sort of underlying this issue, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, but I'd be glad to hook you up with a veterinarian who can speak to those issues. So you can set the ground rules. I can talk about this. I'm not really qualified to talk about this. You can ask, you can offer information, but you can set your own ground rules. Anticipate the questions and rehearse the answers. Now that doesn't mean you memorize the answers because you always want your interview to be conversational in tone, spontaneous, and natural. But that doesn't mean you can't anticipate questions and rehearse answers. In fact, right now, what I would like you to do is take 1 or 2 minutes, write down on your little notepads, what is the one question you fear the most from a reporter? What is the one question you really don't want to be asked? Just write that down. I'll give you just a couple seconds to jot that down. Yeah, you can see this coming, can't you? You can see this coming. Okay, so you're going to anticipate the tough questions and you're going to rehearse your answers. So nothing should take you by surprise. If you're surprised in an interview, it's probably because you didn't think through and do your homework and anticipate what was going to be asked. Gather all the necessary information. You certainly can tell a reporter, I don't really have that information at my fingertips, but I can get it for you. But to the extent that it's possible to go in prepared, it's better to go in prepared. So try to gather all the information that you can in advance. And allow ample prep time. You'll notice that that one is in bold. That's because that could be number 1 through 9. Ample prep time is the most important single factor that will make the difference between a good interview and a bad interview. And there is always time for preparation. I've been coming out of a hearing at the state capitol and had a reporter stick a microphone in my face and said, could you respond to what just happened in the hearing? I say, I'm on my way to the ladies' room. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't go away. And I run to the ladies' room and I think about what I want to say. Okay? How many of you have ever picked up the phone and had a reporter at the other end that wanted to do an interview? Has that ever happened? I am on another call. Can I call you back in 5 minutes? I'll call you right back. There is hardly ever an excuse for not giving yourself at least 5 minutes of good prep time. And it's important. It makes the difference between a good interview and a mediocre or bad interview. And let me tell you this, from my experience, over many, many years, the mistakes that you will make in an interview are not mistakes where you say the wrong thing. They're mistakes where you missed an opportunity to say the right thing. That is the kind of mistake that we make the most, missing the opportunities to say the right thing. So that's why it's important to allow ample prep time to review your key messages, to remind yourself what it is you want to communicate. That's the kind of preparation that's absolutely vital. Then you get into the interview situation. You want to keep those message statements very short, 20-second sound bites. We all know the media, particularly the broadcast media, live and think and eat and breathe in terms of sound bites. So we have to play that game. So we want to make sure that our key messages are no more than about 20 seconds in length, and we can rattle them off very quickly. You've heard people talk about the elevator speech. Well, this is the third of the length of the elevator speech. Think about that. This is the third of the length of the elevator speech. Be friendly and conversational in your delivery. Sometimes we get very uptight, and it's difficult for us to be natural. But you have to recognize that the camera magnifies nervousness. And so you really have to work at being conversational and relaxed. And that takes practice sometimes. It's not a bad idea to practice in front of a video camera and to watch yourself. And it's easy to do that now with computers, with those hideous cameras that just photograph you when you're not even prepared and you're still in your jammies. So it's not hard to do. So get some practice, get yourself on camera, watch how you come off, and try to make the adjustments that you need to make before you have to actually do it for real. This is an important one. Repeat your messages and not your opponent's. Several times I've had reporters say to me, well, what is it that these people have an issue with? What is it that they really are accusing you of? I'm not going to take my time in my interview, which is going to be very limited, to deliver their messages. So when somebody says that to you, you say, you're going to have to go ask them. Their arguments don't make any sense to me. Here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can tell you. So don't be goaded or lured into repeating the other guy's issues. You want to stay focused on your messages. Avoid defense. And it's hard to do that sometimes because we feel as though we're under attack. But I think that from the standpoint of effectiveness in message delivery, it's much more effective to go in saying, here are the things that people really need to understand about our industry. Here are the things that we're doing right. Here is the commitment that we've made. And to articulate those messages in a way that is not defensive, but is matter-of-fact and basic. And when people see you handling those issues that they might perceive as controversial or tricky, when they see you handling that in a very matter-of-fact and relaxed way, that communicates more than anything else that you're not threatened by these attacks and that you don't really place a lot of stock in them. So you don't need to be defensive in order to get your message out. As I said, it's okay if you don't have the information that they're asking. It's okay to say so. It's never okay to bluff. It's never okay to pretend you have the information when you really don't. There's nothing that will wreck your credibility with a reporter faster than giving them bad information that they wind up going on the air with or going into print with, and then you have to come back and say, oh man, I gave you wrong information, I'm really sorry. Your credibility is gone. So you've got to make sure that any information that you give them is accurate and reliable, and if you don't have accurate, reliable information, just say so. It's important to use bridging techniques to return to key messages. How many of you know what bridging is all about? That's good. Bridging is a technique that allows you to create a bridge, essentially, between the question that was asked and the message that you want to deliver. Dr. Croney mentioned those politicians that always give you, answer B to question A. They've been trained to do that. They've been trained to do that. And while it can be aggravating sometimes, if you do it in the right way, it can enable you to put the question in the larger context of your message. So, for example, someone might say, is it true that many greyhounds are euthanized after their racing careers are over? A bridging technique would be to say, I'm very glad you asked that question. It gives me a chance to correct a real common misperception. 98% of racing greyhounds are adopted or returned to the farm as breeders when they retire. And essentially, the only ones that are not adopted or returned to the farm are those that have behavioral problems or other issues that would prevent them from being good family pets. Okay? So you've created a bridge from the question that got asked in a very negative way to the answer that you want to give. Other bridging techniques. Let's take a step back. If a reporter asks you a question that you think is not really the question that allows you to get your message out, let me take a step back from that. Or let me tell you what you're really asking. It seems to me what you're really asking is this, okay? So those are all the techniques that you can use to get from the question that was asked to the answer that you want to give. Never ever off the record or no comment. There is no such thing as off the record. There is no such thing. From the minute the reporter hits the room where you are present until the taillights are a tiny little red glow in the distance, you're on the record. Don't ever think otherwise. And no comment, of course, is, you might as well just put a big G on your forehead saying guilty. Because when you don't comment, it's virtually in these days an admission of guilt or admission of wrongdoing. I mean, you can certainly say, and this is certainly a legitimate response, for example, if there's a crisis. Let's say that you have a dog that attacked and injured a child, and someone immediately asks for a comment. What you can say is, I'm still gathering information, we're still trying to find out exactly what happened, but as soon as we have a handle on the basic facts of the situation, I will get back to you with a statement. So give yourself time, let reporters know that you are going to be prepared to make a statement, but you can't at this time because you just don't have enough information. But never just say no comment. That's the worst possible thing. You know, messages are ours, but they have to be perceived as news in order to get anywhere. You know, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, you know, and there's nobody there to hear it, doesn't make a noise. You know, if our message is put out there, but nobody picks it up and runs with it in the media, does it make an impact? Probably not. So we have to make sure that our messages really meet the standard definition of news. Now that's more important obviously for news media than it is for social media, because you can put a lot of stuff on social media that ain't newsworthy, but it's out there and that's okay. But in the news business, you got to be talking news. So here's how we measure news value. Is it new or unusual? Think in terms of the relevance of what you're going to say. Does it matter? Timeliness. Sometimes there's a particular news hook. For example, if October is National Pet Dog Week or National Pet Dog Month, that gives you a great news hook to say we want to talk about why purebred pets are so important and why having the option to buy a purebred dog is still the best option for a consumer. So think about the news hook and the timeliness and whether your message has relevance in this current context as news. Another element that is important when sort of measuring the news value of your message is how many people are affected by this. If what you're talking about really doesn't affect very many people or very many people aren't touched by it, it's probably not a useful message. So the more you can make your message appeal to the broadest possible number of people, the more you can make it relevant to the broadest number of people, the better. Who should care about your message? This is where the local angle is often important. You might have some big national issue. For example, when Feld won its claim for damages against HSUS and the other animal rights groups, you know, we, for example, in the Greyhound Council, put that on our website. But our people wouldn't really be in a position to speak to that in their own areas because nobody in their local community really cares very much about that. So when you're talking about how many people are affected by your message and who they are, it's important to think about your local area, and oftentimes a reporter will say, well, okay, is there somebody local we can talk to? Is there a local event that's going on to celebrate this issue or to commemorate this observation? So proximity and locale are important to that question of how many people are affected and who they are. And then the question is, the third question that you have to ask yourself in terms of evaluating the news value of your message, how are they affected? How does this affect the people in your audience? Why should they care? That's kind of the human interest angle. Why does this make a difference? So when you're thinking in terms of delivering your message and getting something out to the news media, think about whether it really is news, how many people are affected, and how they are affected. Now, there are some interesting insights that you can gain just by looking at the media picture today, who the traditional media are and where they're going, and it gives you some real specific lessons for getting out there with your message. Newsroom staffs are down by 30% from 2007. That's true across the board in both print and broadcast. News operations are shrinking in size. There are 166 fewer print daily newspapers now than there were in 2008. This is really important. Live TV coverage of events is down by 30% from 2007, and taped interviews are up 31%. Now, why do you think that would be? Live interviews take a crew and a correspondent or a reporter. It takes time and money to send a crew out to do a location shoot, to videotape an event at an off-site location. They can't afford that anymore. So increasingly, instead of doing that, what they'll do is they'll say, come down to the station, we'll do an interview with you. So interviews are up, live coverage events down. That's important for us to know when we're out there trying to get news coverage. Also, TV news stories are getting shorter, and that's very important for us. In 1998, 31% of the stories on the local news were more than 60 seconds in length, and 42% were under 30 seconds. Now, in 2012, only 20% are more than 60 seconds in length, and 50% are under 30 seconds. That means that the time you've got to get your message out is shrinking, shrinking, shrinking all the time. I read somewhere that in the 2004 presidential race, the average presidential candidate got about an 18-second soundbite on the evening news. By 2012, the presidential candidates were getting about 11 seconds of soundbites on the evening news. So if a candidate for president is only getting 11 seconds to get his message out, that tells you something about how much time we're going to get our message out. So time is shrinking, resources are shrinking. What does that mean for us? That means more competition for news coverage. We're going to have to really compete, and we're going to have to really have a valuable news angle in order to pitch our stories. There are fewer reporters and fewer resources to cover stories on location. That means we're going to have to be prepared to go to them and bring our message to them. More interviews taped in advance, that's a good thing, because when you've got an interview that's taped in advance, you can have a lot more time to prepare usually, and it's a little more comfortable setting. Shorter stories, less content, that means that your message has got to be very well defined, very short, very concisely articulated, or it's not going to survive the editing process. News value and message content focus are going to be more critical than ever. Getting TV coverage is always a challenge. Visuals are the key. Back when I was a young whippersnapper in public relations, if you wanted news coverage, you'd call a news conference, and all the TV people would dutifully show up, and all the print reporters would show up, and they'd stand there and they'd take pictures of people talking at a podium. And maybe there'd be a visual or two there that they could shoot, but for the most part, they weren't hung up on it. Things have changed a lot, and that's partly due to the internet. The expectation now among the average consumer is that graphics are going to be very visual, very high-end, very high-test, you might say, and the talking heads just don't cut it anymore. So unless you've got really good visuals, and of course pets are great visuals, animals are often great visuals, unless you've got great visuals, it's unlikely that you're going to get coverage. And then you're going to have to consider factors like how far from the TV station is your location, how long is it going to take the crew to get there if they plan to come, and so forth. If you want to get TV media to a particular event and you're convinced that the visuals are worth the trip, then you email them an advisory. It's a very simple advisory. It just says who, what, where, when, and why. who's going to be there, what the event is going to be, when it's going to be, where it's going to be, and why you're doing it. That's all they need to know. And then you follow up by phone to gauge their interest, to see whether they've got any questions, to see whether or not they're coming. Always make sure you know who to expect. Number one, because you don't want strangers just wandering in with video cameras. You don't know who they are. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't let them in if you had the opportunity to find out who they are, but it just means you need to know who's going to show up. And then you have realistic expectations. You know, you might have a press event that you think goes great. They take a ton of video. They take a long interview. You maybe spent 8, 10, 12 minutes with them. You're going to maybe get 20 seconds. Maybe. Total, if you're lucky. The average stand-up story that they give, you know, when the reporter just stands in front of a location and talks for a few minutes, that's like 88 seconds. So that's the maximum that you're ever going to get, is just a piece of that. How often would you say you do it? Do you do it monthly? More often? How many of you do it more often than monthly? How many of you do it every 3 months, quarterly, say? Okay, maybe once or twice a year? Okay, that's actually a good thing. So you should trim it, trim it, trim it. It's best if it goes on one page. The purpose of that news release will be to publicize newsworthy information. In other words, information that meets those 3 tests that we talked about earlier. It can be to announce an event. It can be to announce a change in your leadership, maybe a new board of directors. It could maybe be to announce that you've achieved a new fundraising goal, that you gave money to a charity, whatever. News release is kind of your standard tool. Letters to the editor, I think, are very valuable tools. How many of you write letters to the editor? That's a good thing. How many of you write them in response to an animal rights letter? And how many of you just write them on a topic, you know, just as a matter of general education and information? Okay, generally then we're responding, and letters to the editor are a great way to respond not only to coverage but to other letters that appear. We know that the animal rights people are out there all the time monitoring media and writing letters, so it's very good for us to pay attention and to respond. Most letters to the editor are restricted by the newspapers to somewhere between 250 and 500 words in length. When you're writing a letter to the editor, obviously it's important to follow the limits that the newspaper asks you to follow, because they will tell you, keep your letters to 250 words or 300. And that purpose of that is to respond to a letter to coverage. And then every now and then you might get someone to consider a guest commentary where they will let you write a piece that they publish on their opinion page as an editorial, a guest editorial. Those can usually run between 570, 750 words. They're a great vehicle for articulating your position on a particular issue or your organization's position. You obviously have to have standing on that issue in order to convince editors that your point of view is worth publicizing, but that's a great way to get a message out and to comment on a current issue. And it does give you a little broader platform to do that. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get on the radio and go from there. We talked about before the break the 3 major tools for generating print coverage. That was news releases, the letters to the editor, and op-ed pieces. Here are some general tips for getting print coverage and for sort of building an identity in print media. It's very useful to establish relationships with reporters and editors. At large urban newspapers, it's more difficult because they have beat reporters who are covering, you know, lots and lots of things in a particular area, such as agriculture or, you know, government or politics or whatever. But it's always a good idea to reach out to the reporters who are covering your issue, introduce yourself, give them a little bit of information about you and your expertise and what issues you can speak to and what issues you feel particularly qualified to speak from an expert perspective on. So get those. Sometimes it's just as simple as stopping by the newspaper and leaving your business card and a little note saying, you know, I'd like to visit with you for 10 minutes just to introduce myself. And sometimes you can actually have a more substantive conversation when you get with a reporter, when that reporter is not on deadline. That's always sensitive. You can submit news releases and commentaries by email. That is the preferred method of delivery now. Nobody sends snail mail news releases anymore. But it's important to know that emails should contain the body of the news release in the body of the email. Most newspapers are set up to filter out emails with attachments because they fear security and virus problems. So they will not accept email with attachments. They'll get bounced back. So if you're writing a letter to the editor or you're submitting a guest commentary, include that text in rich text format within the body of the email so that you don't have to attach a document. Then it has a much better chance of getting through. Letters to the editor can be emailed. Many newspapers have forms right on their websites, and you have to use those forms. If you absolutely have to do that, it's okay to do it that way. I prefer to look under the contact information and find the email address of the editor or the person who is responsible for letters to the editor on the editorial page, because then I know that my message has not just sort of disappeared into web form cyberspace somewhere, but it's actually gone to a person who has an email address. I can copy my clients to let them know that the letter has been submitted, and I can copy myself so that I have a copy of what I sent. So if you can get a personal email for the person who is responsible for letters to the editor, do it that way. But if you have to use the web form on the website, you know, that's okay. Make sure you do keep a copy of what you send, though, so that you can tell if it was published as it was submitted or if they edited. I've not generally had letters to the editor cut too much because I'm always careful to honor their length limits, but I've had editors request that I change the language in a commentary because they were uncomfortable with the way a sentence was worded. And in most cases, I have done that unless I feel like it seriously compromises my message. But you have to remember that newspapers are very fearful of litigation. They're very fearful of printing something that they can't defend. So if you make a statement that a newspaper editor considers might be a little bit over the top or maybe a little bit extreme, they will ask you to modify that. It's only happened to me once or twice, but it has happened. Follow up by email to learn the status of your communication. It always amazes me how people just send off a letter and then say, oh, that never ran. Well, did you ever call and talk to anybody about it? Sometimes you'd be surprised. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And once you've submitted a letter to the editor or a commentary, you need to follow up by email, ask them if they got it, ask them if they are interested in using it. If they're not interested in using it, you might submit it to another publication. Ask them when they might plan to use it. We had an interesting exchange. I had written a guest commentary for a newspaper in response to an animal rights commentary about greyhound racing. I submitted the column. The gal said, we'll certainly consider it. I'm going to be on vacation for the next 3 days. Remind me next Wednesday. I put a note on my calendar, email her next Wednesday. Emailed her on Wednesday saying, just wanted to touch base, check in to see if you were going to use our commentary. Well, yes, I plan to use it, but could you send me a copy in rich text format, because for some reason I'm having a hard time cutting and pasting this. I sent her a copy in rich text format. Then she said, well, can you send me a picture of Mr. Gutierrez, your spokesperson? Absolutely. Sent them the picture. Then could you change this one line, because my editors are a little uncomfortable with this one line. No problem, change that. Does this work for you? She said, yes, that's fine. We had interaction basically for 2 weeks. Then she sent me an email and said, this is great, it's good to go, look for it on Thursday. She emailed me 10 minutes later, said, oops, shouldn't have spoken. Got bounced on Thursday, there's something else that we're covering, but it'll be in soon. And it actually did come in then within the next 3 or 4 days after that. So this is an ongoing process. Never think that once you've clicked the send button and your letter is sent, that that's the end of the story, because it's not. You have to follow up, you have to chase them, you have to be the squeaky wheel, and ultimately the odds are pretty good that you'll get something published. Always respect their deadlines and always respect their length limits. That is the minimum that they should expect from you. Now, radio. I love radio. I think radio is a great vehicle for public education and information. How many of you have ever done radio interviews? Oh, that's great. That's great. You guys get it then. I mean, radio is easy. You can do it usually at home over the phone. You can generally tell the host of the show in advance what you want to talk about, and a lot of times they'll even ask you to provide questions that they can ask you, which is great. So you can take an inventory of the talk shows in your local market, figure out what shows do have opportunities where people like you can get on and talk about topical issues. You might have a pet ordinance that's coming before the city council. You might have had an incident where, you know, a mailman got bitten by a dog. You might have an incident where, you know, a pet store got protested by animal rights people. Who knows? But you know, keep an eye on local news, and when you see an opportunity to inject yourself into the conversation in a way that's topical and relevant, grab it. You could email those producers or call them on the phone and ask them if there would be an opportunity for you to appear as a guest. Tell them what your expertise is. Usually you want to have a little one-page sheet where it can say, here's who I am, here's my expertise, and here are the kinds of things that I would be interested in talking about on your show. Be prepared for call-ins. Many of those shows are call-in shows. You know, you'll get some good calls. You can plant some good calls. If you've got people that are going to be around listening, have them call in. It's, you know, prepare them with some questions so that they can ask you the questions that you want to answer. You're also going to get some of the wackadoodles. They're just going to be out there. They're going to call. That's okay. Never lose your cool. Always be courteous. I've had people be very abusive to me in call-in shows, and my response was just, well, obviously we have, you know, a very, you know, deeply held difference in opinion. I respect your right to your opinion, and I would appreciate your respecting mine as well, and leave it at that. So don't get engaged. You know, there's not really a lot of point in debating those people. But there are people that call in and ask legitimate questions, and the important thing is not to get defensive, but again to say, so glad you asked that question. It gives me a chance to set the record straight. It gives me a chance to give you what I know to be true. So be prepared for the call-ins, and then always in those appearances provide an opportunity for follow-up. Encourage people to visit your website or to visit your Facebook page or to follow you on Twitter if you're on Twitter. Let people know that this doesn't have to be the end of the story for them, that they can get more information and they can interact with you on a continuing basis and get the information that they need. So radio is a great tool. I cannot encourage you enough to go out and hustle radio opportunities. That's just it's a great way for education. And then, you know, what you can do is you can ask them to provide you with a recording of your interview. You can post it on your website so the people who didn't hear it can listen to it after the fact. It can be very helpful, so it's a great resource. Let's talk a little bit about online and social media. Just to give you a kind of a big picture sense of what's out there. 644 million websites. I don't know about you, but that number just blows my mind. 644, I mean, that is way lots of information. Wow, 644 million. I was really surprised by that. 42 million blogs with 329 million readers. How many of you are doing blogs? Blogs are actually a pretty good opportunity for communication if you maintain them regularly. I tried 3 different times to do a blog and had to give up because I could not keep up with it. I could not keep it regular. And that's the one thing about blogging. If you're not there on a regular schedule and people don't learn to look for you, they get out of the habit of looking for you very quickly. So I dropped the ball. But it's important, I think, if you're going to blog, that you do it regularly and faithfully. Facebook, 1 billion active users, which is humongous. And it's kind of now at the point where if you're doing research on any person, here's what I do, and you tell me if you do this differently. The first thing I do is I looked on LinkedIn. I always look on LinkedIn to check out who a person is. Many people aren't on LinkedIn, but a few are, so sometimes I learn. If I don't find them on LinkedIn, I go to Facebook. If I don't find them on Facebook, I go to Twitter. If I don't find them on Twitter, I kind of wonder, are they living under a rock someplace or what? So you kind of got to be out there, you know, at least in one of those media, if not many of those media. Twitter, 200 million active users. And YouTube, 1 billion users, 6 billion hours of video. Think about that, 6 billion hours of video. Now, video is a great vehicle for you guys, because the other side is always using negative video. We very seldom see positive video about human-animal interaction in a way that illustrates what you do on a daily basis. So don't be shy about using YouTube to show the good things that you do and the good things about your work. I think that's a great opportunity, and YouTube is free. It's relatively easy. It's not super easy for somebody who's technically impaired like I am, but it's relatively easy for most people. And you know, it's a really great way to get information out there. And then you can use those videos on your own website. And you know, today it's very easy to produce video. I mean, back in my day, you know, you had to hire a video crew and it cost you a lot of money. But you know, that's not necessary in this case. I mean, you can take your little cell phone, your little smartphone, and you can shoot video. I mean, it's easy. It's not complicated. And it doesn't have to be super great quality if the message is right on and if the images are the way you think they should be. Showing your facilities, the quality of your facilities, the housing that animals are raised in, the treatment that they get, the handling that they get. You can show that in a positive way, and you can do it at virtually no cost. The role of social media, as I said, really is to drive traffic to a central location where people can get information about you. In most cases, that's going to be your website. If you don't really have a website that you feel good about, get one. Get one. It's important. If you're not online with a website that provides the information that people need to know, then you should be getting that website. So the purpose of all that, you know, conversation and all that activity out there in cyberspace, whether it's on a blog or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, the purpose of all that is to get people to the next step, which is your website, which gives them more information in more detail in a way that you want them to understand it. So that's the role of social media. It's not there on its own as a freestanding vehicle. It's there to help you direct traffic to a place where you can educate people more thoroughly. At least that's my view. So why do we use these social media? As I said, drive visitors to your website, build a community of supporters. Every time somebody likes you on Facebook, that's a supporter that you can count on. Share useful information and links. One of the things that I learned about Twitter early on when I became active on Twitter is that the way that you really gain credibility on Twitter is by sharing information, not by self-promotion. The people who just aggressively market themselves and sell for their own benefit on Twitter don't do very well. The people who do well are the people who share information that's of general use and general value that doesn't necessarily reflect directly on them or lead to a sale for them. It's all about sharing and providing valuable content. So sharing useful information and links on your social media accounts establishes that you have a bigger goal than just self-promotion. So you might be posting links to great articles about animal care or animal science or a particular breed or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily relate directly to what you do. It just relates to information that people should have. Certainly social media can help us facilitate reputation management. As I said, if you're not out there in social media, that in itself raises questions about the credibility of your organization. So it's almost as though by your absence you become sort of conspicuous in not a great way. Social media certainly gives you an opportunity to respond to breaking news. And oftentimes when, let's say that there's a big animal rights protest or there's some kind of a catastrophic event, maybe a fire at a cattle barn or something and animals have died. Anytime there's a big event like that, a breaking news story, media like Facebook and Twitter give you a great example to sort of get the facts out in real time and make sure that people have accurate information from a source they can trust. So responding to breaking news is one of the key functions of using social media. And of course, the search engine results are working in your favor when you're on those social media, because if you search, for example, if you Google my name, Marsha Kelly, and you have to say St. Paul, Minnesota, otherwise you'll get some lady that is in Minneapolis and produces spaghetti for General Mills. But if you say St. Paul, okay, first you'll see my LinkedIn profile, then you'll see my Facebook page, then you'll see my Twitter account, then you'll see my website. But the social media, those profiles appear first in the search engines, because search engines pop up those results based on the volume of traffic to those websites. The most heavily trafficked websites are the ones that always pop up first on the search engine. So the big social media like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, they're always going to pop up right away. Well, we know that when people, Google a person or a topic, once they get through that first page of hits, then they have to really kind of work to get through subsequent pages and find more information. So when your Facebook profile, your LinkedIn profile, your Twitter profile, your YouTube account, when they pop up in those first search engine results, basically what that's doing is that's giving you control over the initial impressions that people get of you, because they're going to go to your social media accounts. So that's really, really important, and that's one of the big benefits of being engaged in social media, is that it gives you a leg up in the search engines. Now let's talk a little bit about knowing your audience. This is something that we sometimes forget to think about, but in these days of market segmentation, it's really more critical than ever. Whether you are buying books online from Amazon or buying, electronics from Best Buy, or whatever you're doing online, somewhere in the sky there's this big computer and it's tracking all of your interests. And it's classifying you as a person of a certain age and a certain gender with a certain general category of income, with certain interests and preferences, and everything about you is segmented, okay? You are nothing but a big mass of demographics to the people that sell you stuff. And that's why it's important for us to understand the demographics of our audiences. Who is watching? Who is listening? Who is reading the stuff that we put out? Because if you know who they are, then you have a little bit of an insight into what will move them. So think about the age of your audience, the gender. We know that men and women perceive many issues in very different ways. They process information in different ways. They build solutions, find solutions to problems in different ways. That's important for us to know. Race and ethnicity is important for us to know. I remember, in fact, it was Wes Jameson. I don't know if Dr. Croney is still here, but she mentioned Wes Jameson, who is a researcher, and I knew Wes back many years ago when I was working on the fur issue. And Wes had done a great study of animal rights activists, and this was right after the first big march on Washington by the animal rights groups, which was in like maybe 91 or 92, something like that. And Wes had done this study. And he profiled these activists that turned out for this big march that was sponsored by HSUS and PETA and all the big guys. And he found that these animal activists were basically between the ages of 25 and 50. They were middle to upper income. Something like 75 or 80% were women. The vast majority of the women were single. They had no children, but one or more pets. And they were almost overwhelmingly white. There were very few minorities involved in the Animal Rights March. And so not too long after that, I was doing an appearance at a television station in Milwaukee. It was one of these live shows, local live deal. And we did sort of a debate with an animal rights person there, and they didn't have a very good local spokesperson, so it wasn't a really terribly tough encounter. But afterwards, I noticed that there were 3 or 4 black men and women that came up to me and were waiting to talk to me. And they said, this is really interesting, because, and I had talked about this demographic profile of the activists, that they were almost all white. I mean, like 93% at the time white. And I found that so interesting. And they said, well, you shouldn't have really been surprised, because people in minority groups are still fighting for human rights. They really don't have time to worry about the rights of chickens and mice. They're really worried about, voting rights, housing rights, employment rights. And I thought, duh, and so, I mean, that's a really important, I think that's a really important thing, because what it tells us is that the affluence of our culture has really made people feel more comfortable putting a high priority on animal rights. And remember, Dr. Croney talked about that a little bit, that we seem to value animals in a way more than we do people. And I think members of minority groups are probably very sensitive to that and very attuned to that. They get that in a way that we may not get it because we don't experience the kind of discrimination that people in minorities often experience. So I just think that's an interesting, it's an interesting observation. Looking at these demographics, race, ethnicity, income, education, interests, religion, and politics, certainly religious perspectives are very influential in the way people perceive the use of animals. I mean, there are certain religions that prohibit the use of certain animals. There are certain religions that honor the certain animals. I mean, there are immense varieties of perspective on this issue depending on the religious background and the political background of your audience. So when you're delivering your message, keep those things in mind because they're going to have a significant impact on how people hear your message. Sexual orientation is another one that we might not even thought about a few years ago, but now we have to be aware of the struggle for equal rights and how that might impact on people's perception of the animal rights issue, either positively or negatively. I mean, it's difficult to tell sometimes how those issues cut, but be sensitive to it and think about it. Geography is certainly a key factor in understanding your audience. When you're talking to groups in agricultural communities or groups in areas that depend a lot on agribusiness, they're going to have a different perspective than the very urban centers where it's all about heavy industry and it's all about the only animals that we know are the animals that we see in the park, you know, the squirrels that go by, or our dog who is a part of our family. So geography makes a big difference, and of course knowledge level generally. Most people don't know very much about this issue. Most people have an emotional response based on their own acquaintance with animals. But there are times when we're addressing audiences that do have a greater level of knowledge, and it's important for us to recognize that that's the case and to give them credit for what they know.